It starts with something small, a raised voice, a sarcastic comment, a dismissive glance. Maybe it's at work or at the dinner table or scrolling through messages that leave your chest just a little tighter than before. You didn't go looking for conflict, but somehow it keeps finding you. Someone else's mood, their crisis, their blame, their bitterness. You didn't invite it in, but now it's sitting next to you, taking up space in your mind. And so you ask yourself quietly, why does this affect me so deeply? That's the quiet ache of dealing with difficult people. Not the loud fights, but the lingering residue, the aftertaste of someone's negativity, long after they've left the room. It's not just what they said or did, it's how you carry it. Replaying moments in your mind like a song you never asked to hear. This isn't about drama, it's about the invisible weight of emotional pollution. And if you've ever walked away from someone and still felt their presence in your thoughts, your energy, your day, then this moment is for you. You're not alone in this, and you're not weak for feeling it. The Stoics, ancient as they were, knew what it meant to be surrounded by noise, tension, even betrayal. But they didn't let it define them. They created space, a calm inside the chaos. They weren't cold, they were clear. That's what this journey is about. So if you've ever felt drained by someone else's emotions, if you're looking for a way to stay grounded, centered, and quietly strong in the face of difficult people, you're in the right place. And if that kind of reflection speaks to you, you might want to subscribe to this channel because we explore these ideas often, calmly, deeply, without noise. This is not a quick fix. This is a return to something older, wiser, and already within you. It begins here. You might have heard it before, just don't care, cut them off, move on. But that advice always feels shallow. You do care. That's the problem. There's a reason toxic people affect you. You're human. You care about connection. You crave peace. You seek mutual respect, maybe even harmony. And when that's violated, when someone disrespects your time, your effort, your space, it stings. But here's where the Stoics offer a different kind of medicine. They don't tell you to stop feeling. They tell you to start seeing clearly without distortion. Stoicism is often mistaken for emotional coldness. But that's not what it is. It's not the absence of emotion, it's the presence of discipline. When Epictetus said, "It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about them," he wasn't dismissing your pain. He was showing you a lever of power that's still in your hands. You don't control how they speak to you. You don't control how they treat you. But you do control what story you tell yourself afterward. Here's an example. Let's say someone criticizes you in public. Stoicism doesn't ask you to pretend it didn't happen. It invites you to ask what part of that hurt is real and what part is my ego reacting. You begin to see that your peace doesn't depend on their apology. It depends on your interpretation, and that's radical. It doesn't mean you tolerate abuse. It means you pause before reacting. It means you resist becoming their mirror-matching anger with anger, sarcasm with sarcasm. You're not here to copy their chaos. You're here to observe it, understand it, and choose something better. The modern world rewards loud reactions. But Stoicism asks, what if your strength is in your silence? Imagine a river. A rock falls into it. There's a splash, a ripple, and then calm. The river doesn't resent the rock. It moves around it, still flowing, still itself. That's the clarity Stoicism offers. Not numbness, not indifference, but space. And within that space freedom, here's a thought to sit with. What if the next time someone brings their storm to you, you respond like the river, not the rock? No splash, no chaos, just movement, just clarity. It doesn't always start with a fight. Sometimes it starts with a sigh, a subtle eye roll, a story you've already heard a dozen times where they're always the victim, and someone else is always to blame. Not every toxic person screams. Some whisper, some smile, some dress their bitterness in charm, and their manipulation in concern. That's what makes it so exhausting. It's not always obvious, but your body knows before your mind does. You feel it in your jaw clenched, in your chest tight, in the way you feel drained after just 10 minutes near them. Toxic people come in many forms. The chronic complainer, the subtle manipulator, the emotional black hole who never asks how you are. The passive-aggressive coworker who weaponizes politeness. The friend who only calls when they need something, and sometimes it's someone you love. This is where Stoicism offers its quiet wisdom again. Marcus Aurelius, writing centuries ago in his journal, not for the world, but for himself, reminded himself each morning, "Today you will meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." Not out of pessimism, but preparation. He wasn't shocked by human nature. He accepted it without surrendering to it. He understood that other people's behavior isn't your fault, but it is your responsibility to recognize its effects on you. Toxicity isn't always malicious. Sometimes people are just repeating patterns they don't even see. But that doesn't mean you need to carry their consequences. Imagine someone covered in wet paint, hugging you again and again. They don't mean to stain your clothes, but they do. And after a while, it's not about them, it's about whether you keep letting them get that close. The Stoics taught that wisdom is in perception, seeing things clearly, naming them honestly, and responding without drama. So here's a gentle invitation. Start noticing your body's signals, your energy, your mood after each interaction. Who makes you feel safe? Who makes you feel small? Who leaves you doubting yourself even subtly? Because the Stoics would ask you to examine your life like a philosopher and a scientist. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. Not what's wrong with them, but what's happening to me when I'm around them. Your peace is precious. It's the garden where your decisions grow. And if someone keeps stomping through it, unaware or unconcerned, you don't owe them more space. You owe yourself clarity. Marcus wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." But we might add also with the company it keeps. So ask yourself this: what colors are the people around you painting on your soul? Are they helping you become more grounded and more kind, more free? Or are they slowly turning your world gray? Not all storms come with thunder. Some come in silence over time. But you have the power to see them coming and step away, quietly, calmly, without guilt. That's not cruelty, that's wisdom. You've probably heard it before. Just set boundaries. But what they don't tell you is this: boundaries are not just words. They're not just ultimatums or angry declarations. The most powerful boundaries are silent. They live in your actions, not your arguments. They live in what you no longer explain, defend, or overextend for. This is where Stoicism offers a profound shift. Most people think of boundaries as fences to keep others out. But the Stoics remind us the first boundary you must build is within yourself. It begins in your mind, in your expectations, in the gentle but firm recognition that you do not have to participate in every emotion that is offered to you. Seneca, one of the great Stoics, once said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." He wasn't dismissing pain. He was describing how often we suffer in the space between what we hoped someone would be and who they actually are. How often we grip the idea that maybe this time they'll be different. How often we rewrite reality in our minds, tolerating patterns that no longer serve us because we're afraid of being unkind. But here's the truth. Clarity is not cruelty. And inner boundaries, those quiet lines you draw between what you feel and what you allow, are not selfish. They're sacred. Think of it like this. A lighthouse doesn't chase ships. It doesn't scream or argue with the ocean. It stands still, lit from within. A boundary is like that light. It says, "This is how far I shine. This is where I end. And beyond this line, I do not follow." The Stoics would urge you to examine what drains you repeatedly. What do you say yes to that always leaves a quiet no inside you? And most importantly, why? Because sometimes the need to please others is really a hidden fear of being rejected. But here's the beauty of inner boundaries. They do not require confrontation. They require conviction. You don't have to cut someone off in a dramatic scene. You just stop over-explaining, You stop absorbing their chaos. You stop answering calls at midnight that leave you anxious until morning. You let them have their mood. You let them have their story. But you no longer make it your responsibility to fix, change, or absorb. That's not distance, that's alignment. You remain kind but firm, warm but clear, present but protected. Because the Stoic knows peace doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering your own response. You start to see every situation as a test, not of your power to change others, but of your power to remain unchanged by them. Here's a reflection. What if the next time someone brought you their fire, you didn't try to extinguish it or feed it, but simply refused to burn? What if you became like the sky, vast, unmoved, watching clouds pass, but never chasing them? That's what a boundary feels like, not a wall, a vast space within you that says, I see you, but I do not need to lose myself to meet you. You can love someone and still say no. You can forgive someone and still take space. You can understand someone and still walk away. That's the quiet discipline the Stoics practiced, not by shouting, I deserve better, but by living like they already did. So let this be your reminder. Every time you choose peace over pleasing, clarity over chaos, silence over spiraling, you are building something stronger than a fence. You are building yourself. And that is the boundary no one can cross. It's easy to think that walking away from toxic people should feel empowering, like slamming a door, like rising victorious, like reclaiming your time and peace. But in truth, sometimes it just feels heavy. There's no parade, no applause, just the quiet aftertaste of exhaustion, the mental echo of things left unsaid. You may feel hurt, you may even feel angry. This is the moment where many stumble, not in leaving, but in what follows. The temptation is strong to replay every offense, to craft mental arguments you'll never say out loud, to stew in what they did or didn't do. But here's the Stoic difference. They taught that true detachment isn't just walking away physically, it's walking away mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and not carrying the residue with you. That's the hardest part. Not leaving the fire, but refusing to carry its ashes. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Not better, not louder, not colder, just unlike." So what does that look like in practice? It's when you stop needing them to understand. It's when you stop needing the final word. It's when your healing no longer depends on their remorse. You detach not because you hate them, but because you've learned to love your peace more. This isn't a cold silence. It's a warm release. Detachment is not bitterness. Bitterness clings. Bitterness replays. Bitterness becomes a new prison. Detachment. Detachment sets you free. Picture this. You're holding a glass of muddy water. It's swirling with resentment, anger, confusion. The Stoic approach isn't to throw it at the wall. It's to set it down. Let the sediment settle and drink only the clarity that remains. When someone wrongs you, it's like they hand you a burden. You can carry it. Or you can say quietly without fanfare, "This doesn't belong to me." That's detachment. You begin to see that not all closure comes from others. Sometimes it comes when you stop arguing with what already happened. You stop narrating yourself as the victim. You stop needing to prove that you were right. You start choosing to be okay. It's a shift so subtle no one may notice, but inside, it's seismic. You begin to honor your healing by not rehearsing the harm. You choose stillness over storytelling. You choose presence over pain. The Stoics were not passive. They weren't pushovers. They simply understood that what you give attention to grows, so they gave attention to their inner life, to character, to clarity, to what they could control. When Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal in the Roman court, he didn't plot revenge. He wrote in his journal. He examined himself. He reminded his soul. It is possible to be invincible if one never enters a contest in which victory is not up to you. So ask yourself gently, what battle are you still entering with someone who's not even watching? And more importantly, what if you simply stepped off the battlefield? No explanation, no bitterness. Just silence, just breath, just peace. You detach not to win. You detach to stop playing the game. And that the Stoics would say is where real power begins. So today, take one memory, one person, one weight, and imagine yourself setting it down. Not as a punishment, but as an act of love. You are not bitter. You are just no longer available for the storm. You spend enough time around certain people, and something strange happens. Their patterns begin to echo in your own. You snap a little quicker. You carry tension in your shoulders you never noticed before. Your thoughts feel heavier, more defensive, as if your mind's been dressed in someone else's clothing. It's subtle, but real. This is the part we don't talk about enough, not just how others affect us, but how we begin to reflect them. The Stoics warned about this. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. But those thoughts, they often come from the people we spend the most time with. You can absorb someone's rhythm without realizing it. Their bitterness, their drama, their defensiveness. Not because you agree with it, but because it surrounds you like smoke. And even if you don't light the fire, you still walk away smelling like it. That's why Stoicism is not only about resisting others, it's about recognizing when you start becoming them. This is where the metaphor sharpens the mirror and the mask. The mirror is what we all are naturally reflective. We absorb language, emotion, even posture. But the mask, that's the self we build to protect, to fit in, to defend. And over time, if we're not careful, we begin to think the mask is us. You weren't always reactive. You weren't always guarded. You weren't always exhausted. But now you flinch, even when no one's yelling. Why? Because your nervous system doesn't just process moments. It remembers atmospheres. And when you've been steeped in emotional volatility long enough, even peace starts to feel suspicious. This is why the Stoics practiced daily self-examination. Not out of guilt, but out of humility. They knew how easily we're shaped. Epictetus taught his students to pause and ask, what part of me is responding my reason or my reflex? That's the Stoic mirror. You don't just ask, what did they do? You ask, who am I becoming in response to them? And if you don't like the answer, you have the power to begin again. Every moment is an invitation to return to yourself, to peel off the mask, to clean the mirror, to remember who you were before the noise, before the cynicism, before the emotional armor. Sometimes the hardest part of letting go of toxic people is letting go of who you became around them. But the Stoics knew this. You are not your reactions. You are not your past. You are not the roles you played to survive someone else's behavior. You are your choices. And every time you choose reflection over reflex, calm over chaos, integrity over imitation, you reclaim a piece of yourself. So here's the question. What habits have you adopted not because they're truly yours, but because someone else's energy made you feel you had to? What part of you is wearing a mask just to stay safe? The mirror shows you clearly. The Stoic path leads you gently back. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be honest. And when you are, you'll notice something. That anxiety. It's not you. It's a learned response. That defensiveness, not your nature. Just a survival tool. That numbness, not peace, just exhaustion. And all of it can be unlearned. That's the quiet revolution of the Stoic life. You stop blaming the world for who you've become and you start taking yourself back. One breath at a time, one response at a time, one mask removed, one mirror cleared. Every time you choose awareness, you don't have to fight the influence. You just have to stop participating in it, bit by bit. You return to who you were before their shadows shaped your walk. Not cold, not angry, just free. You care. That's never been the problem. You see the good in people even when they hide it. You feel their pain sometimes deeper than they do. You want to help, to fix, to make things easier. And when someone you care about is hurting, or toxic, or constantly in chaos, it becomes easy to confuse love with self-abandonment. But the Stoics, they drew a gentle line between compassion and complicity, because compassion says, I see your suffering and I care. Complicity says, I will absorb the effects of your suffering even when it harms me. Seneca wrote, a wise man is content with himself, but not so as to be isolated from others. In other words, your kindness must not come at the cost of your clarity. You don't need to be cold. You don't need to cut them off if that's not your path. But you do need to stop trying to save people who aren't swimming toward you. The Stoic view of human nature was not cynical but realistic. They believed everyone was part of a greater whole. But they also believed in responsibility and enabling someone's dysfunction through silence, through endless forgiveness, through constant emotional labor was not seen as virtue. It was seen as a distortion of virtue. Imagine someone bleeding and instead of handing them a bandage, you lie down next to them and bleed too. It doesn't heal them. And now you're both hurting. This is where your compassion must evolve. It must become rooted in boundaries, because real love does not require self-sacrifice. It requires truth. And sometimes truth sounds like, I care about you, but I cannot keep doing this. I understand why you're hurting, but I won't accept being treated this way. I hope you find peace, but I won't walk with you down this road again. That's not cruelty. That's alignment with the Stoic idea that every human being has their own logos, their own path of reason, of consequence, of choice. You are not responsible for someone else's lesson. You are responsible for your presence in their pattern. Let's say someone constantly lashes out, apologizes, repeats. You stay thinking your patience might change them. But in Stoic terms, you must ask, what am I reinforcing here every time you excuse it, rationalize it, cover it up? You're not practicing virtue. You're helping their dysfunction survive. This is not judgment. This is accountability. And sometimes compassion looks like stepping back, not in anger, not to punish, but to stop being the cushion they rely on. You say, I love you enough to believe you can grow, but I will no longer stand in the way of the consequences that might make you. And then you let go, not of love, but of control. Because the Stoic path is not about forcing others to change. It's about choosing what you will tolerate, accept, and align with. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Compassionate people often struggle with guilt. They fear being mean. They fear being misunderstood. But Stoic compassion is not performative. It's not about how you look. It's about what you live. And if your compassion is costing you your mental health, your peace, your sleep, then it's no longer compassion. It's a pattern, one worth breaking, because your empathy is a gift. But like any gift, it needs wrapping. And in this case, the wrapping is a clear boundary. So ask yourself, where have you mistaken loyalty for love? Where have you continued to show up long after it stopped being mutual? You are allowed to love someone and still walk away. You are allowed to wish them well and protect your energy. You are allowed to understand their trauma and still say, that's not mine to carry. This is the Stoic form of compassion, grounded, honest, calm. Not a savior, not a martyr, but a witness to someone else's path without getting lost in it. You can care, you can hope, you can pray, but you do not have to carry. That's the line. And once you honor it, you'll find that compassion no longer drains you. It frees you. There's a moment quiet, but certain when you know it's time to go. Not necessarily forever, not with fireworks or slammed doors, but in the most Stoic way possible, with calm, clear, unshakable inner knowing. You've spoken. You've tried. You've stayed longer than your peace could afford. And now the wisest thing left to do is leave. But we live in a culture that expects noise with endings, big goodbyes, emotional monologues, proof that you were right or that they were wrong. It tells you that closure must be dramatic, that silence means weakness. The Stoics saw it differently. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. He believed in action rooted in reason, not ego. He believed that when something no longer serves your integrity, you quietly step away. And so you don't exit to prove a point. You don't exit to punish. You exit because you're finally choosing peace over explanation. You're letting go, not with rage, but with reverence, not because they're unworthy, but because you're no longer willing to betray yourself to keep the peace. Here's what that looks like. You stop arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop justifying your boundaries to those who trample them. You stop negotiating with patterns that have shown you exactly what they are. There's no need to rehearse one last speech. The Stoics didn't concern themselves with others' approval at the exit. They concerned themselves with living in accordance with their own principles. Imagine a tree shedding its leaves in autumn. It doesn't explain. It doesn't beg them to stay. It lets them fall, gently, naturally, because it's time. That's how you exit, not emotionally numb, just emotionally resolved. It's easy to think closure needs to come from the other person. But closure, as the Stoics would say, is a self-created decision. It's the moment you stop needing validation to walk away. You stop needing permission to protect your energy. You might still care. You might still love them. But you understand now you can hold care in your heart and still walk with your feet in a new direction. Because the truth is, drama doesn't dignify your departure, it delays it. It keeps you tethered to the very cycle you're trying to escape. When you exit quietly, you reclaim a part of yourself. The part that no longer needs to shout to be sure. The part that trusts, that knows, that honors its own rhythm. And yes, they might say you changed. They might accuse you of being cold or distant, but you'll know you didn't change. You simply return to yourself. There's a kind of strength in silence that no argument can match. A kind of clarity in walking away with grace, not because you weren't hurt, but because you've outgrown the need to hurt back. You choose your path with dignity. You release them from the role they played in your life. You step into a quieter chapter 1 where you no longer react to every sound behind you. And maybe that's the ultimate Stoic move. Not the loud boundary, not the dramatic exit, but the calm retreat from the places that taught you how loud things had to be, just to be heard. So ask yourself, can you leave without resentment? Can you go without dragging the story behind you? Can you end a chapter not because it was perfect, but because you are ready to write something new? You don't have to slam the door. You just have to stop standing in it. No more back and forth, no more emotional gymnastics, just forward, one step, then another, with grace, with calm, with full presence in the quiet that follows. That silence, it's not emptiness. It's space for healing, for becoming, for peace. You walked away. You chose silence over chaos, clarity over conflict, and yet the noise hasn't fully stopped. It lingers not around you, but within you, in your thoughts, in sudden memories, in moments when your guard is still raised even though no one's there to hurt you anymore. That's the aftershock. It's not a failure, it's a normal part of choosing peace after prolonged exposure to emotional turbulence. Because detachment isn't a switch, it's a process. And the Stoics knew this well. Seneca once wrote, "You must linger among a limited number of master thinkers and digest their works if you would derive ideas which shall win firm hold in your mind." In other words, once you remove yourself from the noise, don't just sit in the silence, fill it with strength. The aftershock is your invitation to rebuild, not urgently, not perfectly, but with quiet intention. You may find yourself second-guessing. Was I too harsh? Maybe it wasn't so bad. Should I go back? These questions are natural. They don't mean your boundary was wrong. They mean your nervous system is recalibrating. You spent a long time adapting to unpredictability, to walking on eggshells, to interpreting tones, dodging moods, and reading between the lines. Now, without that environment, your mind reaches for what's familiar, even if it hurt. Here's where Stoic practice becomes medicine. You return not to the person, but to yourself, to reflection, to writing, to stillness. The Stoics journaled not because they needed to document their lives, but because they needed to process their minds. Marcus Aurelius' Meditations wasn't meant for readers. It was his personal way of staying anchored amidst political pressure, betrayal, and grief. So now you do the same. You sit with a pen or with your thoughts and ask, what did I learn from that relationship? What boundaries protected me? What patterns do I no longer wish to repeat? What part of me still needs healing? You let the echoes speak, but you don't let them steer. And when they grow loud, you meet them with presence, not judgment, not suppression, just awareness. Imagine the sea after a storm. The winds have passed, but the waves still crash. The Stoic doesn't shout at the water to calm down. They sit by the shore, they breathe, they wait, because they know the tide always settles. That's how you move through the aftershock, not by demanding peace immediately, but by practicing it patiently. And here's something else the Stoics would remind you of. You are not broken because you feel. You are not weak because you miss someone who hurt you. You are not foolish because part of you still craves what you chose to walk away from. You are healing, and healing isn't linear. It rises and falls. Like breath, the only mistake is to expect perfection. Instead, return to the rhythm of the inner citadel, that space within you, untouched by chaos. It's still there, waiting for you to sit quietly inside it. No one else can build that space for you, but once you begin, it becomes your shelter and your compass. You practice saying, I remember what hurt me, but I do not have to live in that memory. I feel the echo, but I no longer follow its direction. I miss what never truly existed, and that's okay. I am here now, and here is enough. The aftershock will pass, not because you force it to, but because you no longer feed it. You choose calm in the aftermath, the way a Stoic would choose virtue in adversity, not for reward, but because it aligns with truth. And that truth is simple. You've made the hardest choice already. Now comes the daily sacred act of living that choice with grace. Let it be quiet, let it be gentle, let it be yours. At the end of it all, after the noise, the decisions, the boundaries, the letting go, you return to something far more essential. Not the story, not the conflict, not even the healing. You return to yourself. The Stoics spoke often of the inner citadel, that untouchable core of a person, built not from ego or armor, but from clarity, character, reason. It is the space no one can invade, the calm behind your eyes, the stillness that outlasts the storm. And if this journey of walking away from toxic patterns has revealed anything, it's this: you are stronger than you thought, and softer than you feared, and more free than you believed. The Stoic doesn't brag about that strength. They don't flaunt their peace like a trophy. They live it, breathe it, protect it, quietly, deeply, consistently. So now you ask not, what should I do, but who am I becoming? You notice how far you've come, how many invisible battles you've won, just by choosing not to engage. How many storms passed because you didn't chase the thunder. And maybe there's still grief. Grief for the version of you that tolerated too much. Grief for the time spent walking on eggshells, speaking in softened tones, dimming your light. But even grief can be sacred if it guides you gently back to wholeness. This is where you are now, not untouched, but untouchable. Because your peace is no longer reactive, it's rooted. And your boundaries are no longer defenses, they're declarations. And your compassion is no longer self-sacrifice, it's clarity in action. You've left the chaos, you've faced the echo, you've stopped dancing to someone else's rhythm, and now in the quiet that remains, you build one breath, one thought, one new pattern at a time. So return to your citadel. Let the world spin. Let others choose their path. You are here now, and here is where peace lives.